The mysterious bride. John Carter never believed in love at first sight. He was a man of logic, a space engineer who worked long hours fixing ships and machines. Love was something for dreamers, not for a guy like him. But all of that changed when he met Elara. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen. Her golden eyes seemed to shine even in the dim lights of the space station. Her long black hair flowed like silk, and her voice was soft but powerful. There was something mysterious about her, something hidden beneath her beauty. John didn't ask too many questions. He just knew that from the moment he met her, he couldn't stay away. Their love story was fast, almost too fast. In just a few months, John found himself madly in love. Elara was perfect in every way. She was kind, intelligent, and had a strange grace to her movements. But no matter how much he tried, she never spoke about her past. Whenever he asked where she was from, she would smile and say, "A place far away. A place I can never return to." John thought she had a painful history, something she wanted to forget. He didn't push. He just held her hand and told her, "It doesn't matter. The future is what's important." Then, one evening, under the artificial sky of the space colony, John proposed. Elara's golden eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, she just stared at the small silver ring in his hand. Then, without a word, she pulled him close and whispered, "Yes." It was the happiest day of his life. The wedding night. Their wedding was small but beautiful. Only a few friends from John's engineering team attended. Elara had no family, at least none that she mentioned. John didn't care. She was all that mattered. After the ceremony, they returned to their new home, a quiet cabin near the outer sector of the colony. It was a simple place, but John knew they would make it special together. That night, as they stood in their bedroom, John noticed something strange. Elara was standing near the window, looking at the stars. Her hands trembled slightly. "Are you okay?" John asked, walking toward her. She turned around quickly, forcing a smile. "Yes, I never thought this day would come." John smiled. "Me neither." He reached out and touched her cheek. Her skin was soft, too soft, almost like silk. Elara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "John, there's something I need to tell you." Before she could continue, something strange happened. The moonlight from the window fell on Elara's arm, and her skin shimmered. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It actually glowed, as if tiny golden particles were moving beneath it. John froze. What was that? Elara stepped back, pulling her arm away. "John, listen to me. You love me, don't you?" "Of course, but..." "Then promise me you won't be afraid." John's heart pounded. "Afraid? Afraid of what?" "Elara, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shaking. She hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned the sleeve of her dress, revealing more of her shimmering skin. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat. John's breath caught in his throat. "What are you?" Elara looked away. "I'm not what you think I am." Before she could explain, a loud explosion shook the house. The attack. The windows shattered as a powerful force shook the walls. John grabbed Elara, pulling her close. What the hell was that? Then they heard it, a deep, hissing sound coming from outside. John grabbed his plasma pistol from the nightstand and rushed to the door. When he looked outside, his blood ran cold. Strange figures stood in the darkness. Their bodies were tall and thin, their skin covered in dark, insect-like armor. Their glowing green eyes stared directly at him. One of them hissed, pointing a sharp claw toward Elara. "We found her. The lost queen is here." John barely had time to react before the creatures charged toward the house. Elara grabbed his arm. "John, we have to run." John turned to her, still struggling to understand. "Queen, what the hell is going on, Elara?" Elara's eyes glowed brighter now, almost like fire. "I promise I will explain. But if we don't leave now, we won't live long enough to talk." John didn't hesitate. He tightened his grip on his pistol and nodded. Outside, the creatures screeched, raising their weapons. John braced for battle, his mind racing with a single thought. Who, or what, did I just marry? The attack. The night had started with whispers of love, but ended in the screams of war. John's mind raced as he stood at the shattered doorway of their home, gripping his plasma pistol. His wedding night was supposed to be the start of a new life, but now it felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Outside, the creatures moved like shadows, their insect-like bodies glistening under the colony's artificial lights. They weren't human. Their elongated limbs, razor-sharp claws, and glowing green eyes screamed of something not from this world. But what sent ice through John's veins was the way they looked at Ilara, not with curiosity, not even with hatred, but with recognition. The lost queen is here. One of them hissed, its voice a guttural, clicking sound that barely resembled speech. John barely had time to react before the first one leaped at him. John's first battle. Years of working on warships meant John wasn't a soldier, but he wasn't defenseless either. He raised his plasma pistol and fired. The blast hit the creature dead center. It let out a hideous screech as a hole burned through its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it staggered back, its wound sealing almost instantly. John's stomach twisted. Regenerative abilities, he muttered. The creature snarled and lunged again. Too fast. John barely had time to dodge before a sharp claw ripped across his shoulder, slicing his shirt and drawing blood. Ilara, run, he yelled, firing another shot. But Ilara didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward, her entire body glowing with golden light. Ilara's true power. John had seen Ilara as beautiful, graceful, and mysterious. But now, she was something beyond human. Her eyes, once a soft golden hue, blazed like twin suns. Her skin, which had shimmered faintly before, now glowed with raw energy, pulsating like a living star. She raised her hand, and a sudden shockwave exploded outward. The attackers were thrown back, their armored bodies crashing through trees and rocks as if they weighed nothing. John could only stare, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. Ilara, what the hell are you? She turned to him, her face filled with sorrow. I didn't want you to find out like this. Find out what? John demanded. Another explosion shook the ground as more enemies descended from the sky, their ships hovering above the colony. The sky lit up with flashing red warnings from the colony's defense alarms. The automated turrets activated, sending bursts of energy at the intruders, but they were too fast. We can't stay here, Ilara said urgently. John, you have to trust me. John looked at her, then at the burning remains of their home. The life he thought he had, the future he imagined, it had just been torn apart. But no matter how much he wanted answers, survival came first. The escape. Ilara grabbed John's hand and ran. The two sprinted through the dense artificial forest that lined the colony's edges. Behind them, the hissing creatures followed, leaping from tree to tree like predators closing in on their prey. Ilara, John panted, I'd really love an explanation right now. There's no time, she replied. We need to get to my ship. John almost stopped. Ship. He had assumed she was just another colonist, a refugee maybe, but she had a ship, and these creatures called her a queen. But before he could ask, something massive landed in front of them. It was taller than the others, its dark armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Unlike the smaller ones, this one had a crown-like structure on its head, its eyes glowing an eerie blue instead of green. The other creatures immediately stopped and bowed. John's grip tightened on his pistol. That's not a good sign. The crowned creature took a slow step forward, its voice a deep rumble. You have hidden for too long, Ilara. The throne is not yours to abandon. Ilara clenched her fists. I told you, Keveris, I am no queen. You don't have a choice, Keveris hissed. The bloodline must rule, or it must be destroyed. John exhaled sharply. Okay, that's bad. Cavorus turned to him, his blue eyes narrowing. And you? His voice dripped with disgust. The human. The lost queen has fallen this low. John smirked, raising his pistol. Yeah, well, the lost queen happens to be my wife. So how about you crawl back into whatever alien hellhole you came from? The creature laughed. Foolish human, you do not understand what you have married. Then he moved. John barely had time to blink before Cavorus was in front of him, his clawed hand reaching for John's throat. Ilara's choice. Before the fatal strike could land, Ilara intercepted, grabbing Cavorus' arm. Energy crackled around her fingers as she forced the massive creature back. Cavorus snarled. You dare defend this weakling? Ilara's eyes burned. He is not weak. John had no idea whether that was true or not, but he appreciated the vote of confidence. Ilara, we need to leave. Now. She hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Follow me. With a wave of her hand, the air rippled like a mirage, and suddenly, in the clearing ahead, a massive spacecraft uncloaked. John's jaw dropped. Okay, that is not what I expected. Cavorus roared, signaling his warriors to attack, but it was too late. Ilara and John rushed inside the ship, and as the doors sealed shut, Ilara slammed her hand against a glowing panel. The ship roared to life, lifting off in an instant. Outside, Cavorus and his forces watched helplessly as the ship blasted into the sky. John barely had time to breathe before Ilara turned to him, her golden eyes filled with guilt. John, I need to tell you the truth. John looked at the woman he had married, the woman who wasn't human, the woman who was being hunted across the stars. Yeah, he exhaled, slumping into a chair. I think it's about time. The truth about Ilara. The ship's engines hummed, the vibrations thrumming through the metal floor. John sat in the cockpit, staring at his hands. He could still feel the heat of the plasma blasts, the pain of his bleeding shoulder, and the terror of the monstrous creatures that had shattered his world. But none of that compared to the shock of what he had just witnessed. His wife, his mysterious, beautiful wife, had powers. She had a hidden spaceship. She was a queen of some alien empire he had never heard of. And now, he was flying away from Earth, chased by creatures that wanted her dead. John had seen a lot of strange things in his years working in space, but this was something else. Ilara stood in front of him, her golden eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Fear. I know you have questions, she said softly. John laughed bitterly. Questions? Oh yeah, I've got a few. He gestured around them. Like, what the hell is this? Who the hell were those guys? And most importantly, who the hell are you? Ilara sighed, rubbing her hands together. Her fingers still glowed faintly, remnants of the energy she had unleashed during the fight. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I really did. But I was afraid. John narrowed his eyes. Afraid of what? She hesitated, then turned away. Through the viewport, the endless void of space stretched before them, stars flickering like distant memories. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't love me anymore. John felt something tighten in his chest. Ilara. He stood up, stepping toward her. I married you because I love you. But right now, I feel like I don't even know who I married. She turned to face him, and for the first time, John saw the weight of centuries in her eyes. I am not from Earth, John. He exhaled sharply. Yeah, figured that part out. She gave a sad smile. I am Xilari. My people come from a hidden world far beyond the known galaxies. She took a deep breath. And I am, or was, their queen. John blinked. Queen. She nodded. The last of my bloodline. The last ruler of Sileria. John ran a hand through his hair. Okay, so let me get this straight. You're an alien queen. You've been hiding on Earth, and now those things. The ones that attacked us are after you. They are called the Gorgons, Ilara said, her expression hardening. A ruthless species that has hunted my people for centuries. John sat back down, rubbing his face. Why? What do they want from you? Ilara hesitated, then lifted her hand. A small sphere of golden energy flickered to life in her palm. John's breath caught in his throat. My people are born with energy within us. It is not magic, not technology, but something else, something unique to the Xilari. Our energy can heal, create, and destroy. She closed her fingers, making the light disappear. That is why the Gorgons want me. My blood holds the power to end their greatest weakness. John frowned. Weakness. Ilara nodded. Their bodies regenerate, but my energy can burn through their regeneration permanently. They cannot heal from Xilari's touch. John felt the weight of her words sink in. She wasn't just their enemy. She was their extinction. That's why they called you the Lost Queen, he muttered. Ilara nodded. They thought I was dead. I let them believe it. She wrapped her arms around herself. I ran away. I abandoned my throne, my people, everything, just to survive. John exhaled, leaning back against the chair. And you ended up on Earth. She nodded again. Hiding among humans was the safest choice. Your planet is primitive compared to the wider galaxy, and the Gorgons rarely look for survivors in such undeveloped worlds. John snorted. Gee, thanks. Ilara's lips twitched in a small smile. I meant it as a compliment. John sighed. And then you met me. Her expression softened. Yes, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. He looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had laughed with him. Held his hand, whispered sweet words in the quiet of the night. None of that had been a lie. But she had been running. And now, because of her past, he was running too. A sharp beeping cut through the tension. Ilara turned to the control panel, her expression darkening. They're tracking us. John stood up. How? She pressed a few buttons, scanning the radar. Gorgon ships, fast ones. They will catch up to us soon. John clenched his fists. Can we outrun them? Ilara shook her head. Not for long. This ship is designed for stealth, not speed. We need a plan. John looked at the display, watching the red dots. Enemy ships, closing in fast. His heart pounded. He had spent his life fixing ships, not piloting them in intergalactic chases. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a hero. But he was a human, and humans didn't go down without a fight. Then we make a stand, he said. Ilara turned to him, her golden eyes searching his face. You would fight for me. John scoffed. Ilara, you're my wife. I'd fight an entire damn universe for you. Her lips parted, and for a moment, something flickered in her expression. Hope. Then the ship shook violently as the first enemy blast hit. Ilara jumped into action. They found us. John grabbed the nearest weapon, a sleek plasma rifle hanging on the wall. Then let's show them what a human can do. Ilara smiled. You have no idea what you just started. Outside, the stars burned bright as war came rushing toward them. Journey to the stars. The ship trembled under the weight of enemy fire. Alarms blared in warning, red lights flashing across the control panels. John had no experience piloting a spacecraft, but he didn't need to. He could tell they were in deep trouble. Ilara, he shouted over the sirens. If we're gonna die, now's the time to tell me you have a plan. Ilara's hands moved fast over the controls, her golden eyes scanning the displays. I have a plan. John let out a breath of relief. Good. It's just very dangerous. John groaned. Of course it is. She turned to him, urgency in her voice. Do you trust me? John didn't even hesitate. Always. Her expression softened for just a moment before she slammed her fist on the control panel. The ship lurched violently, then shot forward at an impossible speed. The chase begins. John's stomach flipped as the sudden acceleration threw him back into his seat. Outside, the starry void became a blur as Ilara's ship dove through space, dodging laser fire. "They're still gaining on us," John yelled, gripping the chair to keep from flying out of it. Ilara cursed under her breath. "The Gorgons have speed-enhanced ships. We can't outrun them for long. So what do we do?" She pressed a button, and a holographic map of the nearest planetary system flickered to life. One location flashed red, a dense asteroid belt. "We go through there." John's eyes widened. "You're insane. Flying through an asteroid field at this speed is suicide." She shot him a smirk. "Only if you're a bad pilot." Before he could argue, Ilara jerked the controls hard. The ship veered right, racing toward the asteroid belt. Behind them, the Gorgon ships roared after them, weapons blazing. A desperate escape. The moment they entered the asteroid belt, everything became chaos. Massive chunks of rock spun wildly through space, some as small as pebbles, others the size of mountains. The ship twisted and turned, weaving through the deadly maze at breakneck speed. John clenched his teeth as a massive asteroid tumbled toward them, blocking their path. "Ilara, hold on," she shouted. At the last second, she pulled up. The ship narrowly missed the asteroid, scraping along its surface before diving under another. The Gorgon ships weren't so lucky. One of the pursuers slammed into an asteroid, exploding into a fireball. Another tried to follow their path, but got clipped by debris, spinning out of control before crashing into a larger rock. John grinned. "That's 2 down. But 3 still remained." "Ilara, this isn't working. We need a real plan." She gritted her teeth. "There's one option, but it's dangerous." John laughed dryly. "What else is new?" She punched in a new course, and suddenly the ship veered downward, toward a massive, glowing anomaly. John's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" "A wormhole." John choked. "AWA. Hold on." Before he could protest, Ilara sent the ship straight into the swirling vortex of energy, into the unknown. The moment they entered the wormhole, reality twisted. John felt his entire body stretch and compress at the same time. Light flickered in impossible colors, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The ship lurched out of the wormhole, coming to a sudden halt in a completely different star system. John gasped for air, gripping his seat. "Okay, I hate that." Ilara let out a breath of relief. It worked. We lost them. John looked around. The space outside was strange, filled with glowing nebula and a colossal planet with rings made of ice and dust. "Where are we?" he asked. Ilara checked the controls. "The outer rim of the Celari Empire. We're close to my home." John exhaled. "Good, because I need a drink. And a doctor." He glanced down at his bleeding shoulder wound, which had worsened during the chaos. Ilara winced. "I should have taken care of that earlier. Let me help." She placed her hand gently over his wound. Warm, golden light pulsed from her palm. John felt an odd tingling sensation, then a sudden wave of relief. The pain vanished, and when he looked down, the wound was completely gone. He stared at her. "That's incredible." She smiled softly. "It's just a part of what I am." John swallowed. Every time he thought he was starting to understand her, she did something even more impossible. But before he could say anything, the ship's alarm blared again. "What now?" Ilara's expression darkened as she checked the radar. A massive fleet was approaching. John's stomach dropped. "Gorgons?" She shook her head. No. The ships were sleek, elegant and glowing with golden energy. John turned to Ilara. "I'm guessing these guys are yours." She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the screen in silence, her expression unreadable. Then, a transmission came through. A deep, commanding voice echoed through the ship. "Ilara Xilari, lost daughter of the Empire. You are to surrender immediately and return to the throne." John's eyes widened. Oh, this just got complicated. Ilara set her jaw, staring at the fleet. "No." John blinked. "Wait, what?" Ilara straightened, her entire body radiating defiance. "I will not return as a prisoner. If I go back, it will be on my own terms." The transmission was silent for a moment. Then the voice returned. "Then prepare to be taken by force." The fleet opened fire. John threw his hands up. "Oh, come on." The ship rocked under the attack, and once again, John and Ilara were forced into the fight of their lives. A human in an alien war. John barely had time to breathe before the first energy blast rocked the ship. The impact sent a violent shockwave through the hull, rattling every control panel and nearly throwing him out of his seat. "Damn it," he shouted, gripping the armrest. "These are your own people, right? They have a funny way of welcoming you home." Ilara's fingers danced across the console, trying to reroute power to the ship's failing shields. Her golden eyes blazed with frustration. "They're not attacking to kill," she muttered. "They're trying to disable the ship." John gave a sarcastic laugh. "Oh well, in that case, I feel much better about getting blown up." Another impact. The shields flickered, barely holding. The fleet was massive. Dozens of sleek, golden warships, their engines humming with the same glowing energy that ran through Ilara's veins. They moved in perfect formation, surrounding their small vessel like a predator circling wounded prey. A transmission crackled through. "Ilara, lower your shields. You will not be harmed, but you will be taken. This is your last warning." Ilara clenched her jaw. "I won't be their puppet." John eyed her. "And what's plan B?" "Because we're running out of options." Ilara exhaled, her fingers tightening around the controls. "I don't know." John blinked. "Excuse me, you don't know." Before she could answer, the ship lurched again. This time, sparks flew from the control panel, and John knew the shields were gone. The next blast hit, hard. A console exploded, sending a wave of smoke and fire through the cabin. John coughed, waving away the thick black fumes. Ilara slammed her hand against the emergency shutdown. The ship shuddered, groaned, then went dark. Total power failure. They were dead in the water. John stared at her. "Tell me that was part of the plan." Ilara didn't answer. A final transmission came through. "Prepare to be boarded." Captured by the Xilari. John had never been a fan of alien prisons, but so far, this one wasn't the worst. The walls of the holding cell were smooth golden metal, faintly glowing as if pulsing with a heartbeat of energy. No bars, no guards, just an energy field sealing them inside. John tested the field once. The moment he touched it, a sharp jolt of electricity shot up his arm. "Okay, yeah," he muttered, shaking his tingling hand. "That's a no." Ilara sat on the edge of the bench, her expression unreadable. She had been silent since they were dragged off the ship. Her own people had treated her like a criminal. John wasn't sure what was more shocking, the fact that she was royalty, or the fact that her people seemed to hate her. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "you want to tell me why your royal guards treated you like a fugitive?" Ilara exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Because to them, I am one." John raised an eyebrow. "You mean because you ran?" She nodded. "I abandoned the throne. I left when my people needed me most. To them, I am a coward." John frowned. "You ran because the Gorgons were going to wipe out your entire race. That's not cowardice." Ilara shook her head. "It's not that simple." John leaned forward. "Then explain it to me." Before she could answer, the doors slid open, and a figure entered. The High Commander. John expected a king or a council of elders, but instead, a single man stepped inside. He was tall and regal, with the same golden eyes as Ilara, but colder, sharper. His silver-white robes shimmered as he moved, and his dark hair was braided in an intricate style. He had the unshakable presence of someone who commanded armies. Ilara's face darkened. Kairos. John glanced at her. I take it you two know each other. Kairos stalked in front of them, his gaze locked on Ilara. You should not have returned, he said coolly. You gave up your right to rule the day you abandoned us. Ilara stood, anger flickering in her glowing eyes. I left because staying would have meant death for all of us. Kairos scoffed. And yet, we survived. Ilara's expression faltered. John frowned. Wait. What? Kairos turned to him for the first time, as if just noticing he existed. His gaze was ice cold. And you, the human. His voice dripped with disdain. Is this truly what you've been hiding with? John folded his arms. Nice to meet you too, Your Highness. Kairos ignored him, turning back to Ilara. Your people suffered because of your weakness, and now you return, expecting to be welcomed back as a queen. Ilara clenched her fists. I didn't come back to take the throne. Kairos raised an eyebrow. Then why are you here? Ilara hesitated. John sighed. Let me guess. We need an army to fight the Gorgons. Ilara nodded. We can't fight them alone. Kairos studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed. You are naive if you think we will fight for you. John stood. They're coming for you too, genius. You think they'll stop at just her? Kairos turned to him, unimpressed. You speak boldly for someone so insignificant. John smirked. Yeah, well, humans have a habit of being underestimated. It usually ends badly for the people doing the underestimating. Kairos's eyes narrowed. A warning? John shrugged. More like a spoiler. Silence hung in the air. Then another voice interrupted. Perhaps we should let her prove herself. John turned, and his breath caught. An elderly Xilari woman entered the room, her robes even more elaborate than Kairos. Unlike the others, her eyes held wisdom, not judgment. Kairos straightened. High Elder Vena. Vena stepped forward, her gaze landing on Ilara. The Gorgons are rising, she said. Perhaps it is time for the lost queen to decide where she truly belongs. John saw something shift in Ilara's face. Resolve. Ilara took a deep breath. Then she lifted her chin and said, Then give me a chance to fight. Let me prove I am still Xilari. Vena smiled. Very well. Kairos's expression soured. This is a mistake. Vena ignored him. Prepare for the trials. John blinked. Trials. Vena turned to him. If she wishes to fight for her people, she must prove herself worthy. John sighed. Yeah, of course. Why make things easy? As they were led away, John glanced at Ilara. This is gonna be fun, isn't it? Ilara smiled. For me, maybe. For you, not so much. John groaned. Great. As they stepped into the unknown, John knew one thing for sure. The real fight was only beginning. The final rescue. The arena was unlike anything John had ever seen. It wasn't a traditional battlefield. No trenches, no cover, no escape routes. Instead, it was a massive floating platform made of shifting metal plates, hovering over a bottomless chasm of glowing energy. On the far side stood Kairos, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the High Elder Vena and a council of Xilari nobles observed from an elevated throne, their glowing eyes locked onto the two competitors standing in the center. John took a slow breath, gripping the plasma staff they had given him. So this was the test. Ilara stood beside him, her own weapon glowing with energy. Her stance was steady, her golden eyes focused. Kairos's voice echoed across the arena. Ilara Xilari, lost daughter of the Empire, you stand accused of abandoning your people in their time of greatest need. To prove you are still worthy, you must face the trials of the ancients. John shifted uncomfortably. You guys love making things difficult, huh? Kairos ignored him. He turned to Ilara. Do you accept the challenge? Ilara lifted her chin. I do. Vena raised her hand. Then the trial begins. A deep rumble shook the platform as the shifting metal plates separated, forming jagged gaps between them. The energy beneath them pulsed like a living thing. John tightened his grip on the plasma staff. This doesn't look good. Ilara shot him a sideways glance. Don't fall. John swallowed. Noted. Then the first enemy appeared. The trial begins. The air shimmered, and suddenly, 3 towering figures emerged from the energy below. John's stomach dropped. The creatures weren't Gorgons. They weren't even alive. They were Xelari war golems, massive constructs of pure energy and ancient metal, each standing over 10 feet tall. Their glowing eyes locked onto Ilara and John, and in unison, they raised their blazing weapons. John took a step back. Are you serious? Giant robots. How is this fair? Ilara didn't answer. She simply launched forward. The first golem swung a massive energy blade, aiming straight for her. But Ilara twisted midair, flipping over the attack and striking the golem's chest with a pulse of golden light. The construct staggered back, sparks flying. John barely had time to react before the second golem turned on him. The metallic giant lunged, its energy hammer crashing down. John rolled sideways, narrowly avoiding the impact as the platform shook violently beneath him. Okay, he muttered, gripping his staff. Let's see what this thing can do. He swung the weapon, pressing the trigger. A burst of plasma energy shot out, slamming into the golem's leg. The creature stumbled, but it didn't go down. John cursed. Oh, come on. The golem swung again, and this time, John had no time to dodge. At the last second, Ilara intervened, her energy flaring as she sent a wave of force that threw the golem back. She glanced at John. You okay? John grinned. I'm great, just getting warmed up. Ilara smirked. Then let's finish this. Together, they launched into the fight, dodging attacks, countering with bursts of energy, and slowly wearing down their opponents. But the golems kept regenerating. John panted. This isn't working. We need a different plan. Ilara's gaze flickered toward the center of the arena, where an ancient Xelari symbol glowed faintly on the ground. That seal, she muttered. It's the power source. If we destroy it, the golems will fall. John exhaled. Then let's break it. The problem. It was heavily guarded. A desperate move. The moment Ilara rushed toward the seal, the golems went berserk. 2 of them blocked her path, while the third turned on John with renewed fury. John gritted his teeth. All right, big guy. You want me? Come get me. Instead of running, he charged straight at the golem, sliding under its massive legs and firing a burst of plasma into its back. The impact destabilized its core, causing the golem to stagger, just enough time for John to leap onto its back. Ilara saw the opening. With a single motion, she unleashed a blast of pure golden energy, a wave so powerful that the platform cracked beneath her feet. The energy ripped through the golems, shattering their cores and sending them crumbling into the abyss below. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a deep chime echoed through the arena. Kairos frowned. The High Elder Vena stood, her expression unreadable. John looked around. Did we win? Vena nodded. You have proven yourself. Ilara let out a breath, exhausted but victorious. John grinned. Well, that wasn't so bad. Then the alarms went off. The Gorgon attack. Before anyone could react, the massive display screens flickered, showing a horrifying sight. Gorgon warships were descending upon the Xelari capital. John's stomach twisted. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Kairos turned sharply to Vena. How did they find us? Vena's expression darkened. There is a traitor among us. Ilara's fists clenched. We don't have time to figure that out. We need to act now. John looked at her. What's the plan? Ilara exhaled, then turned to Kairos. "We need to evacuate the civilians and prepare for war." Kairos hesitated. Then he nodded. For the first time, he looked at Ilara not with anger, but with respect. "Then let's fight." The final stand. As sirens blared across the capital, the Xilari warriors prepared for battle. John stood on the balcony, staring at the incoming fleet. This wasn't just about Ilara anymore. This was about survival. Ilara stepped beside him, gripping his hand. John squeezed it. "I married into a mess, didn't I?" She laughed. "You did." John sighed. "Well, I guess I'd better make sure we survive our honeymoon." Ilara smirked. "Then let's give them hell." As the first Gorgon warship descended, John took a deep breath. Tomorrow, the fate of an empire would be decided. And somehow, a human engineer from Earth had ended up in the middle of it all. The human hero. The sky burned with war. John stood on the balcony of the Xilari capital's great tower, gripping a high-powered plasma rifle. Above him, the heavens were alive with chaos. Xilari warships clashed against the unstoppable tide of Gorgon destroyers. Explosions lit the sky like dying stars, while streaks of blue and red energy arced between the two warring fleets. From below, the sounds of battle rose, the clash of weapons, the screams of warriors, the raw desperation of a people fighting for survival. John inhaled sharply. So this was what it meant to be in the middle of history. Beside him, Ilara's golden eyes glowed brighter than ever, her energy crackling like a storm barely contained. "This is it," she murmured. "The battle that will decide everything." John tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then we'd better win." A Gorgon dropship roared overhead, its underbelly opening. And then they dropped. The invasion begins. From the sky, dozens of Gorgon warriors plummeted toward the city, landing with thunderous force. Their insect-like bodies gleamed in the neon lights of the Xilari capital, their razor-sharp claws glinting as they rushed forward. The Xilari warriors moved to intercept, their energy blades igniting with fierce determination. The streets turned into a battlefield. Kairos, standing atop the command tower, barked orders to his soldiers. His once cold eyes now burned with determination. He had accepted the war. Ilara turned to John. "We have to get to the central core. If the Gorgons breach it, they'll disable our planetary defenses." John exhaled. "Right. Of course. Because nothing can ever be easy." She grabbed his hand. "Come on." The race to the core. They ran through the war-torn streets, dodging plasma fire. Buildings collapsed around them as Gorgon warriors pushed deeper into the city, cutting through anything in their path. A group of Xilari civilians ran from a collapsing structure, a Gorgon brute chasing them down. John didn't think, he acted. He fired his rifle, hitting the brute square in the chest. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. John gritted his teeth. "Of course you're still standing." The Gorgon charge. Before it could reach him, Ilara stepped forward, raising her hands. A pulse of golden energy erupted from her palms, hitting the brute directly in the face. This time, it screamed. Its body convulsed, its regenerative abilities failing against Ilara's power. John fired again. This time, the brute fell. The civilians rushed past them, shouting thanks. John turned to Ilara. "I really need to get me some of those powers." She smirked. "I think you're doing fine as a human." John grinned. "Flattery's not gonna save the world, sweetheart." Ilara grabbed his hand again. "Then let's hurry." The final confrontation. They reached the central core chamber, a massive underground vault containing the heart of the planet's defenses. John stopped dead in his tracks. Inside, a figure was already waiting for them. Kavoris. The Gorgon Emperor himself stood in the center of the room, his massive form looming over the controls. His biomechanical armor hummed with dark energy, his blue eyes glowing with a terrifying hunger. Ilara tensed. "It's over, Kavoris. Step away from the core." Kavoris laughed. You still think this is your world to protect. Your rule was weak. Your people fell because of your cowardice. Ilara clenched her fists, but before she could speak, Kavaris turned his gaze onto John. And you, the human. John smirked, leveling his rifle. Yeah, I'm the guy who's about to ruin your day. Kavaris sneered. You are nothing. An insect crawling where it does not belong. John's expression darkened. Funny. I was just about to say the same about you. Kavaris lunged. The battle of the core. John barely dodged in time as Kavaris's claws splashed through the air, missing him by inches. The sheer force of the attack sent shockwaves through the chamber. Ilara countered, unleashing a blast of golden light, but Kavaris absorbed it, his armor twisting the energy into dark matter. John cursed. Oh, that's new. Kavaris lashed out, grabbing Ilara by the throat and lifting her into the air. Ilara gasped, her glow fading slightly under his grip. Your power will be mine, Kavaris snarled. John didn't hesitate. He ran straight at Kavaris and jumped onto his back, slamming his plasma rifle against the Emperor's head. Kavaris roared, throwing John across the room. John crashed against the wall, pain exploding through his ribs. He coughed. Okay, that was dumb. Ilara, now free, took the opportunity. She summoned every ounce of energy she had and unleashed it. A blinding wave of golden fire erupted from her body, engulfing Kavaris. The Gorgon screamed. His armor cracked, the dark energy shattering under the sheer force of Ilara's power. John, still dazed, saw his opening. He grabbed the emergency override control, the one connected to the core's failsafe. He pulled the switch. A blast of raw planetary energy surged out, vaporizing Kavaris where he stood. The Gorgon Emperor let out one final scream before disintegrating into nothing. Victory at last. The moment Kavaris fell, the entire Gorgon fleet hesitated. Then, one by one, their ships began retreating. On the battlefield, the Xilari erupted in cheers. The war was over. John collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard. So, do I get a medal for that? Ilara laughed, kneeling beside him. You get to live. That's better than a medal. John grinned. Yeah, I guess that's fair. A new beginning. Days later, the Xilari people gathered in the Great Hall, celebrating their victory. Kairos approached Ilara and bowed. You have proven yourself, my queen. Ilara exhaled. I'm not a queen, Kairos. I'm just a Xilari. Kairos smiled. Then you are the strongest one of us all. John watched as the Xilari people chanted Ilara's name, celebrating her return. Then she turned to him. So, what now? She asked. John smirked. Well, we survived an intergalactic war, killed an emperor, and saved a civilization. He took her hand. I say we finally have our honeymoon. Ilara laughed. Sounds perfect. As they stood together, under the endless sky of a newly freed world, John knew one thing. This was only the beginning.